Welcome to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. The Citizens Reporter is brought to you from the Valley Access Studios out of Stillwater. To help me with today's news for the week is Mr. Mark Bradley, one of our regular citizen reporters. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here.
Thank you for having me. We're going to look at a major money grab here in a couple of minutes because I went to the Maplewood workshop and they were talking about this gold line, as they call it now. And it is gold that they are pumping with no rational, logical effort.
And this is, of course, particularly of interest to us, since we both live in Maplewood and we have previously reported on these programs, the community meetings of some of the neighbors who live in a neighborhood north of 3M, that the city of Maplewood has slated to repurpose the land from single-family residential to high-density housing and multi-use housing commercial development. And we're going to see as we go through the workshop film clips and as they talk about what is looked for and what are the aspirational goals for setting up a rapid bus transit station, you will then come to find out that all the things that they look for in setting up their aspirational rapid transit bus station or terminal is absolutely missing from the Maplewood site that is being proposed, other than the fact that they believe that the ridership almost exclusively will be from the employees of 3M. So we'll get to that as we move along in our clips. But I'm glad, Mr. Bradley, that you had gone to that workshop so that you could see firsthand the materials that they had at the meeting and the maps and the schematic plans.
And a couple of things, there's so much misinformation. And that's why I grabbed a couple of things off the internet myself. Plus I brought in the packet. So you could take a look at the packet. But the thing that you'll start to notice, and Diane, that's why I'm not going to show to you, the public, because if you pull it up off the Maplewood site, as you'll catch off of here, most of this wasn't set up for Maplewood. It wasn't set up for Minnesota. This is the people that designed the program in Portland, Oregon. And all this material is really created for the Portland area. And the dynamics are totally different in Portland than Maplewood. Plus also they misconceive what is Battle Creek Park. There's two Battle Creek parks. There is a park that's Maplewood's Battle Creek Park, and then there is the State Park.
Ramsey County Park, yes.
Right. And that's down off of Highway 61, and they convoluted that it all can be connected, and it can't.
Well, if you are a white-tailed deer, it's connected. Put it that way.
Well, if you were going to go down Sterling, and you went all the way down Sterling, there is Sterling down on 61 by Battle Creek Park that's off of 61. That is the county park. And that park, the Sterling, dead ends 5 times before it reaches that area.
Yes.
So there's no way of getting from, even if the road was connected, but if you take a look at the map that I have here, it shows that they are planning to build the road to Battle Creek Park, Maplewood, because it's Afton Park.
This whole issue about connectivity between Battle Creek Park, which is a Ramsey County park, and Afton Heights Park, they are right next to each other, but the connectivity isn't necessarily there. And that is one of the issues that have to be worked on. But we'll get to that as we move through our clips, because we have quite an extensive amount of coverage on this. It is of importance and relevance not only to people in Maplewood, but people who are in St. Paul or Woodbury, because those are also communities that are going to be served by this. And Maplewood is just a passover spot. They are not actually, in my opinion, going to financially benefit from this gold line at all. So let's get started with our first clip, and this is from the Maplewood Workshop of February 26, 2018.
We just have one item of business, which is the Gold Line update and the 3M Maplewood Station preliminary concept review. I was just going to say a few words about this, and Councilmember Smith, if you'd like to say a few things, and City Manager Coleman. We're thrilled to have you here today and see this moving forward. I noted the PowerPoint was pretty extensive, pretty long, so you've now got over an hour to talk with us, and we're excited about that and looking forward to your presentation. I myself have been involved with this probably over 10 years, and it's been an excellent project. I had a few changes along the way, and I think for us in Maplewood, we might just have one stop there, but is really going to serve our residents to be able to go into St. Paul for jobs, to go out to Woodbury for jobs. So this is going to be an important.
First of all, Mayor Nora Slawick has indicated, and I believe this is true, that she has been involved in the conceptual plans and moving forward the Gold Line for 10 years. Now, for many of the residents that I have spoken to in that area that's going to be repurposed by Maplewood in the comprehensive plan and repurposed from single-family housing, where they currently live in their single-family houses, to high-density residential, it was news to them that their mayor had been so intricately involved in pushing along the Gold Line, which is going to affect their neighborhood. And yet she, when she talks to them, implies that she is just kind of coming to this sort of, as she wants to listen to their concerns. Well, my point was in talking to those residents is that how can somebody who has been invested in this concept for 10 years now, as mayor of Maplewood, vote against it? While she may give lip service to them that she is going to listen to their concerns, that is only lip service, because she could never vote against it because she has so much invested in it. And I also noticed, Mr. Bradley, and I'm sure you did too, is that she talks about who's going to use this. Those people who are in Maplewood who have jobs in St. Paul, or those with jobs in Woodbury. My question is, why are we worried about providing transportation to jobs in St. Paul and Woodbury? Why isn't she focusing on creating and maintaining and retaining good paying, sustainable jobs in Maplewood? As we've covered in other programs, only 1,700 of the individuals who live in Maplewood actually work in Maplewood. What we need jobs in Maplewood rather than ways to help our residents find how to get to the work in other communities. Let's get jobs in our community.
And the funny part about it, Diane, is the fact is they don't want to have even the people of Maplewood have any input on it. Because what they did was they set up what they call a half-mile circle. And you can see that on the sheet here. It's hard to see it, so that's why I haven't put it up here. This is the sheet I've got here. And there's a circle here. It's hard to tell, but it's right here in the middle here on there. If you pull it up on the city's deal to take a look at the package, you can see it there. There's only a couple of houses that would have anybody living in them. In fact, when I talked to the person that was doing the presentation, who was a representative of Washington County, and I've actually made an application to be part of the steering board on this because I feel there's so much misconceptions there. She was talking about, well, we've got the people from landfall. Well, that's not even in the circle.
Well, and that's not even Maplewood.
And that's the other point that I was going to try to get to. But I wanted to point out that landfall's on Tanner's Lake. And that was outside the circle if you take a look at it. So they should have not even been considered for it because they don't meet the criteria of that half-mile circle that she was
Right.
pointing out.
And we will get to that clip where they talk exactly about what you are referring to, because that is an excellent point. And I believe that one of our clips may have that map as well for our viewers to be
Right.
able to see later in the program. So let's move on to our next clip.
Councilmember Smith.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I'm honored to have been sort of picked up where you left off on this project, and it's been great partnering with the other cities and counties involved. And this is, to me, a great example of the way that different governmental entities can get together in a bipartisan way and build a cooperative project that's a boon for economic development, a boon for transportation, and is a way to really drive East Metro-wide planning, which is, I think, critical and something that, in my opinion, the east side is a little bit behind on compared to where the west side's at. And so I'm very excited to be a part of it. You know, this is our only stop really in Maplewood, and I think part of the challenge that we're going to be working with is how do we get Maplewood residents access to this station? And so that's one of the things I'm excited to learn about today is what does that look like for us, and what are the implications of that, and how are we going to be able to partner with our friends at 3M and the city and the county and all the other folks I mentioned to make that happen. So I haven't seen this yet, but I've heard about it, and I've heard it's pretty exciting. So I think we're in for a treat.
We hear a lot about how exciting this is, how excited Brian Smith is that he has picked up the gauntlet from Nora Slawick. She previously served on the committee that he now serves on, so that's what he's referring to. So again, to those residents who are north of 3M, where their land is tentatively slated under the new comprehensive plan of being repurposed, well, you know, you're not going to have an advocate in your corner from Councilmember Brian Smith. He, of course, wants to make this one of his marks of success of his city council tenure. And certainly if he continues and runs again for council, or should he run for mayor this fall, he can certainly mark this on his list of accomplishments. And I find it fascinating that, of course, he does talk about how this is going to help the east side. And while that may or may not be true, he's talking about, again, St. Paul. And he is true, though, in saying that one of the biggest challenges is getting access to this for Maplewood residents, because as we've talked about on these programs, 3M is not too keen about having a station that's on their property that is open to the public, because they have proprietary properties and buildings, and they do not, and I don't blame them, do not want to have a bunch of members of the public wandering around on 3M property or using 3M parking ramps to park their cars in order to get on the Gold Line to go to a job in Woodbury or to go to a job in St. Paul. So you see the conundrum that there is for Maplewood in that, again, there's little benefit to Maplewood to have this station in Maplewood.
And why make 3M the heavy on this thing? Because the fact is that they're trying to say that this is going to supply transportation for 3M employees, but the 3M employees can park on site at 3M for free. So there's no reason for them riding the bus in there, first of all. And second of all, when you're taking a look at it, 3M also has its own transit programs that work with the employees. I worked at 3M, so I know all these systems that are there. So unless they're going to be expanding the campus by taking up a lot of the parking areas, it doesn't make any sense for us to spend that money. And finally, when we're looking at, remember, half of the bus lines have been abandoned in St. Paul because there's not enough riders on them, and the other half are movable depending upon how many people are going to ride it.
Yeah.
The riding on a bus is temporary, and we're spending $100 million or better in St. Paul and on the east side for something that is very, very, how should I say, tentative at best,
Well,
when they're putting light rail over in Minneapolis. It's not it's apples and oranges. It's not the same thing.
Right.
And that's what you got to question.
Yes, very good comments, Mr. Bradley. Let's take a look at our next clip.
City Manager Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Slawik, members of the council. I'm going to ask staff Mike Martin to give us a little intro and introduce the consultants who are with us tonight to give us the presentation and update on the Gold Line.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As mentioned, the Gold Line Bus Rapid Transit project is a 9-mile transit line with 11 stops, one of those which would be located at near the 3M Center in Maplewood. Last year, this project did enter the development phase, which includes station area planning. That's what we're here tonight to discuss.
I included this clip because I always find it totally fascinating that at these Maplewood City Council meetings, they got to have 3 people do introductions before they actually get to the real person who's got the information. So you have to have the mayor introduce the city manager. Then the city manager has to introduce the employee of City of Maplewood who's in the planning department, who gets to say 3 little sentences, who then gets to introduce, well, the consultant who's really doing the work. So let's find out what the consultant has to say.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have been managing the project from the county's perspective. Ramsey and Washington, we're jointly working on this, and we share staffing responsibilities, as you're aware, with Rush Line. Ramsey County is the staff lead for that. Washington County is on the tail end of that project, but used to be a little bit more integrated. And so all of these transitways obviously don't know geographic boundaries, so we share our staffing responsibilities. But I'm actually transitioned into a new role with a slight name change as the Deputy Project Manager. So I'm integrated within the Metropolitan Council Metro Transit Office to deliver this project. As we know, Metro Transit will operate this project, but the cities are a huge part of it, and the counties are a large piece of the funding of it. Between Ramsey and Washington County, we will fund about just under 50% of the capital cost, and together just 50% of the operating and maintenance costs. So because of that, the counties felt strongly that we wanted somebody to be in that project office, so day-to-day decisions, that those connections are made, directly back to the cities and back to the counties.
The real power behind this, who's actually spearheading this project, is the Metropolitan Council.
Yeah, right.
And we're not surprised because transit is one of their key components of their mission statement. After all, they do run the bus system. And keep in mind, they have as part of their overall reaching goals, ensuring that the sanitary sewer systems throughout the whole entire 5 or 7 county metro area are sufficient for projected population growth if that population growth should ever happen. So certainly transit is within their bailiwick. So let's take a look at our next clip.
Actually is we have to refine the design, and I have a note here that says all the elements you will be able to see, but with a little bit of a caveat to that. All of the large items that you will be able to see, exactly where the stations are going to be, how the transit lanes fit in with the roadways, where some of the parallel bike and pedestrian options are, how, where there's going to be a traffic light to help make sure the buses and the cars can get through there. All of those larger project decisions will actually be made in the next 6 months. And then from there, we need to get environmental clearance on all of those items. So there is going to be a ton of involvement from your staff, as well as from community members and yourselves with technical, policy, and community committees. There will be a policy committee formed. You'll be receiving a letter, hopefully in the coming days, from the chair of the Met Council to appoint one of you folks to that committee that will meet monthly to continue to help make decisions.
Many of these items that she was mentioning that will have to be talked about with regard to design and engineering and talking about stoplights and how buses are going to interact with the cars and transportation. Keep in mind, in Maplewood, where the anticipated route is going to be for this rapid bus transit is actually along a frontage road, which in Maplewood is between 94 and 3M. And that is on the north side of the Freeway 94. So you see, much of what she's talking about may be true once you get into St. Paul and you're not necessarily going along a frontage road, which actually serves only as a frontage road. The frontage road in Maplewood essentially only has on its frontage 3M. And that is the only aspect to that frontage road that really there's going to be the biggest concern about from the 3M standpoint is how to buffer that station from the 3M property. Now, I also found it interesting that she then talks about the various different committees, because Mr. Bradley, you mentioned something about applying for a committee.
Yes, I did.
And I also volunteered and put in my application for that committee, but let's hear what they have to say as they continue on in their workshop discussion.
So with that said, the county, along both Ramsey and Washington County, worked with the Federal Transit Administration to get a grant to help all of the cities look at what happens around the station. I mean, obviously, we know this station is going to be, a piece of infrastructure in the middle of, your city on 3M's campus, but how do we work to make sure that people can get to these stations, that the land around these stations is zoned properly to accommodate the amount of people coming in and out? And so we received this grant from the Federal Transit Administration and hired Crandall Arambula to help us.
Now, while those statements that she's saying are true for all the other proposed transit stations, most of her comments are irrelevant as to the station in Maplewood. Because you see, along the Interstate 94, it is already zoned commercial because 3M is zoned commercial. There aren't any residents along there. There isn't any concern about the zoning and making sure it's properly zoned. However, Maplewood is trying to piggyback on that when they are trying to repurpose the neighborhood north of 3M into being multi-unit family housing and multi-purpose residential commercial use. So you see, you have to really pick apart the words very carefully and understand what the ramifications are in this particular context for Maplewood. So this presentation could be given in regard to any station, but if we were to look at it in particular to the Maplewood proposed station by and at 3M, most of her comments, as I indicated, are irrelevant.
And one last point, pay attention to the costs as they said it. They gave the minimum cost for crossing, but 3M has not been part of this at all because of, they don't want, if they had done that, 3M would have had a multi-tiered parking facility on its site. They are putting a bridge to attach 3M to this. And then they're going to put a bridge across the highway, and that's going to be $12 million for that bridge. I believe you've got that coming up as a cost. So pay attention to that, because that gives you an idea that 3M has no involvement in here on this program. They don't have to need it, but it would have been nice because they had an actual exit ramp that's right there at the 3M site, because they're going to build it so close to the main office building, to 220, it's going to miss that ramp. So the fact is, if you're on there, you're going to have to go into St. Paul to get onto the highway to go in farther into St. Paul, because you're missing the 3M ramp, because they had moved it so they could look like they were actually accommodating 3M. 3M would rather probably have it farther back if it was part of something that was a quasi-public, private operation together, because it'd make more sense.
Very good. Let's continue.
Can you clarify one thing? I think I saw on social media that you're looking for sort of a business group. And so is that the one where a council member would sit on? Or can you clarify, we haven't been this far, right?
Yep.
So we don't know the territory. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Mayor, thank you very much for that question. I had that written down and skipped that note. So there's going to be 3 committees formed. The technical, which Steve and Michael are both on, the Community and Business Advisory Committee, and there is an application out right now due on Friday for a resident and a business representative for each station. I just looked it up. We have 3 residents have applied for Maplewood. I don't have the names off the top of my head, but 3 residents and nobody from the business community. I think in general, it would be great to have somebody who works at 3M, who's more of that general perspective about what life is like on the 3M campus, because we do talk with their facilities and their security and their public affairs folks all the time, so we know how to get in touch with them. But we don't have a lot of communication with just kind of a quote-unquote typical work.
I am confused, Mr. Bradley. Okay, they've had this opportunity for Maplewood businesses and residents to apply to be on this committee, and yet it's only just really coming out into the public the Monday before the Friday, which is the deadline.
Right, and on top of that, I did talk to her after the fact when I made my application. I wanted to also add, I know that you made an application as well. You're the only one that then would be a business individual, but they were saying then that, and what does this have to do, because of this is supposed to be a Maplewood, not landfall. They had, according to her, 8 applications from landfall that are in there, and yet it's actually the Minnesota mining site, which is a Maplewood site.
And keep in mind, she was saying that, well, they would like to have somebody who is an employee of 3M, and as we'll hear later, that she doesn't actually care whether they live in Maplewood or not. And I'm thinking, well, then that takes the space of either the Maplewood business representative,
Right.
or that takes the place of a Maplewood resident
And since
position.
I'm an ex-3Mer, maybe I should be filling that spot.
That's right. And I'm thinking, what does it matter what it's like on the 3M campus if what the role of this committee is with regard to the Gold Line? What does the Gold Line care about what it's like on the 3M campus to be an employee? What do they care? What it means to be an employee for 3M. You see what I mean?
I see.
That's not specific to the transit issue that's at hand.
I think it's an afterthought to say, well, then if it does fail, which most bus lines do, then we can blame it on 3M, though 3M was never part and parcel of the program. So keep paying attention. And also pay attention to those diagrams they're showing, because of most of them you're going to really realize were created probably for the Portland program. They they put a 3M building back there with the 3M emblem on it, and it looks like the office building. But other than that, it could be any place in the United States, and that's what these architects probably drew it back when they were doing the Portland program.
Very generic, in other words.
Right.
Let's continue.
So you would potentially want our help with
Yeah, so if
that,
that's
or-
been out there on social media, it's on the website, the Twitter, the Facebook page, it has been
Okay.
sent. I think, yes, both the mayor and Councilmember Smith received that via email. City Manager Coleman, I think you were copied on that email, so sharing that as, much as possible, or targeting for folks that you think might be great, we're more than happy. We will have the city's, most likely Councilmember Smith, since he's been the one involved before, help make the selections on that committee for the whole quarter, but of course with an eye on Maplewood.
How are we going to be sure that we're getting a holistic view of this from the Maplewood residents' perspective, when it's very clear the message I heard was recruit your buddies to apply to a position that's available on this board. Keep in mind, there's only 2 positions for Maplewood on there available, but recruit your buddies. That is the message I heard. And they didn't let it out of the bag too soon, so they only got 5 days to recruit their buddies. And then get this, guess who gets to have really strong input in the selection of which buddies get to serve on that committee, but none other than Council Member Brian Smith. So do you think that in all of this, that they're going to be looking for a voice that may be independent, that may be analytical, that may bring something else to the table other than what they want to hear?
Also, with qualifications, let's understand, If there is no other business person who's made an application, Diane should have that application right now. But also understand that I worked at 3M. I have a lot of perspective and understanding what's going on there and why it doesn't make sense to spend over at least $300 million on a program that will be abandoned and blamed on 3M when 3M had no action on it all. This is the MTC, the Metropolitan Council, trying to shuffle enough money over to this side of town to say, yes, we are taking care of the east side. No, they've abandoned the east side for over 25 years, and I won't go on to the issues I have with it, but I'm trying to make the point with you. Take a look at the issues here and ask if this isn't nothing more than money shuffling, and it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And I love it that Mayor Nora Slawick acts as if she's very naive about this whole thing and saying, well, we don't really understand how this process works. She just previously said that she's been invested in this program for 10 years. I don't believe that she doesn't understand the process, isn't familiar with how this operates. Keep in mind, before being mayor of Maplewood, she was a state representative at our state legislature. So you got to give her some credit there, right? I mean, she must have been doing something for 14 years.
The little old sidestep.
Yes. Let's continue.
Councilmember Smith, of course, you've been the lead on this, and I've got my hands pretty full with rush line, but, so I think you'd be doing it. But anyway, we'll have that discussion, and he also has his light on.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. I just wanted to jump in here real quick, Mayor, and say that City Manager Coleman and I were talking a little bit today about some opportunities for us to maybe reach out to those who've been active in the community, either commissioners or other volunteers, or some of those folks that may have kind of a community interest in being involved and being a little more active about this maybe than we have in the past. I think it might be a good idea just to make sure they understand the opportunities out there. If we had a little more time, I'd recommend maybe things like Maplewood Living, but I think the deadline is Thursday, so.
Friday, yep.
Friday.
Of this week?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's coming up pretty quickly. So I'd say also if we have folks watching or other folks in the community you all know and maybe looking for that opportunity to start getting involved in urban planning and economic development, this is a great opportunity. And really have a lot of say in what this ends up looking like in our community. So
I'm looking for an opportunity to be involved in urban planning. Mr. Bradley, are you looking forward to an opportunity
I
to be
definitely
involved
am.
in urban planning?
I definitely am, and I'm very excited. Plus, also, I have about 25 years of trying to act towards getting more excitement into St. Paul and Minneapolis, not just trying to take it away.
He was talking about, well, they could have advertised it in the Maplewood Living. You know, that's the monthly newsletter that City Hall sends out to all Maplewood residents once a month. Keep in mind, Maplewood has a new communications department now. And you're telling me that they didn't know that this was something that was coming up, that they could have either communicated on their government cable channel that they have total control over, or that they couldn't meet the print deadline to get it in their own newsletter that they send out to everybody? Boy, that sounds like that's very short-sighted in planning on their part.
Well, also, when you take a look at the Lilly News, I'm surprised that there was not a reach out by the city council to Lilly News, because they were talking about things like there was a new bathroom added to a park, one of theirs. I think that this would be a lot more interesting, a lot more exciting for Lilly News to run into their weekly newspapers than a lot of the stuff that they have been writing.
And that's a good point, Mr. Bradley, is that if the city council and the city manager of Maplewood had missed their print deadline for their own monthly newsletter that they send out to the citizens of and the residents of Maplewood, they could have certainly got it in the prior week's edition of the Lilly Review that serves Maplewood.
Well, of course,
Good
we've got
point.
that. We've got that well-paid communications individual. He must be. Well, what is he doing if he's not communicating?
That's right.
Maybe we should save a little money and get rid of the communications director.
Right. Make the communications director
Communicate.
accountable for the communication that he failed to do with the Maplewood residents. Well, let's continue with our next clip.
Is there a link to the application? Because I saw the business one, but I didn't.
It's community and business,
Business,
so one
okay.
group, one group together. Yep.
For business, do they need to also live in Maplewood or just work in Maplewood?
Mayor and council members, the way we have it written is that we're looking for people that generally live about a half mile, live, work, own property, own a business within that half mile. So they could, if they're also a Maplewood resident, that would be great as well. But if they're, quote unquote, just a 3M employee, I think that works too.
So tell me about the process and how it's decided. So like if you get 10 applications, what happens?
Very good question. So Mayor, there will be a subcommittee formed, and this is typical how the council, Metropolitan Council does this, is that we will have a representative from each one of the cities, as well as the Metropolitan Council, and somebody from their Equity Advisory Committee, sit down and look at all the applications, and then make the selections based off there. And then the council ultimately, the Metropolitan Council ultimately puts their stamp of approval on it.
Okay, good.
So that's the process.
Did you catch something though, Diane? That circle we brought up earlier, remember, half mile? Take a look at the circle on the sheet here, and I got to ask you, do you see any businesses that would even be in that circle?
Right. Other than 3M themselves, and certainly you could see that the freeway here intersects the circle, so the whole bottom half of the circle here is all parkland.
Right.
There's no businesses, nobody lives there. Now Ramsey County, though, does say that they have homeless people living in all their parks. But I do not know that for certain, but I just was talking to a gentleman last night where he was told by Ramsey County that they have homeless living in all their parks, and that he's just going to have to get used to it.
But
That's
you have
what-
to have an address and a telephone number to contact. So I don't think they're going to go and use those people.
That's right. So I don't think that they're going to be serving on the committee. Let's continue with our next clip.
Any other questions? I think this is exciting. I mean, it's exciting and sort of scary all at the same time, right? Because it's the next phase, but what an opportunity, right? Anything else? Okay, good. Thank you. Deputy Director, right? Did I get that right?
You did.
Yes.
Exciting and scary. But it just occurred to me, Mr. Bradley, another reason why maybe Nora Slawick sees that this is something that would benefit her. A mayor of a community is supposed to live in their community. So for instance, Nora Slawick, as mayor of Maplewood, is supposed to live in Maplewood. While it is true that she has a home that she has purchased and pays taxes on in Maplewood, rumor has it is that she's very seldom in her home in Maplewood and actually spends the bulk of her time in Lake Elmo. Now, I'm wondering how this is all going to shake out in May when she gets married, and then how is she going to convince her new husband to decide to move from Lake Elmo to her home that's in the Gladstone area, where they have increased the densities and voucher housing availability. Why would he want to move from an area of Lake Elmo that has, from what you can see in Google Maps, has a lot of wooded area behind it, and it's beautiful, wildlife, ecologically great, and move from there to Gladstone in Maplewood? How are they going to meet this challenge? Because at the DFL caucuses, she was handing out campaign literature that said re-elect Nora Slawick for mayor of Maplewood. Maybe she sees that once this gold line goes in place, that she can get on at one of the stops on that end of town and just take the gold line into Maplewood to the 3M stop, hop on a bus, and take that bus all the way then to City Hall in order to go to the city council meetings. This is something that we're going to have to keep our eye on and see how the mayor of Maplewood, how she is able to address this challenge in her personal life in choosing between living in Lake Elmo and living in Maplewood.
Well,
because if you are elected to an office in Maplewood, you must live in Maplewood. Let's continue with our next clip.
About some ideas about ideal BRTOD, Bus Rapid Transit Oriented Development, that stands for. Not every station can be ideal, but that's kind of what we aspire to do with each of these. We'll talk about the entire corridor and then specifically about the 3M Maplewood station. So discussion period as well, and also talk a little bit about next.
And I think it's important that he identified that what he's talking about are the aspirational goals and the ideal rapid bus transit station and transit area. These are the types of things that they try to achieve. These are the things that they look for. These are the types of things that they are trying to make possible for the future. And as you listen to these things, then think about this particular station in Maplewood and figure out which of these aspirational features actually fit. Let's take a look.
When we looked at our project, as we were hired for this, there was really 4 drivers that we were looking at, and a lot of words here, but it's just something that we come back to again and again. So we've incorporated this work into what we've done. Our previous meeting that we met with you a few months ago when we talked about opportunities and constraints is really its intent is to build off of these and make sure that we address all of these by.
Keep in mind, the area that we're talking about in Maplewood is between McKnight and Century, and that area only. And that area is where the Interstate 94 goes from east to west, and we're talking about the frontage road to the north of Interstate 94, and 3M is immediately right next to that frontage road. That's where the 3M property starts. There is nothing else there. And generally speaking, most people do not drive along that frontage road unless they have some business at 3M. Now, of course, you could get off on the Century exit if you're going west and drive along that frontage road to get over to McKnight. But why would you do that when you could just stay on the freeway and get off at the McKnight exit if that's what you wanted to do? So few people use that as a cut through in order to get between Century and McKnight. Let's continue on.
When you talk about ideal BRTOD, this is what we start with. One, we've got a station where you see that little blue dot in the middle, and then we've got a guideway. So that guideway connects all the 10 stations throughout the entire corridor. For us, we've got a planning area by contract that we need to look at because it's important to understand not just at that station, but at a half mile out from the station. So a half mile south and a half mile north makes an entire mile corridor.
That is the area that Mr. Mark Bradley was talking about, and you can see in half of that area, as we move further along here, half of that circle is actually covered by not just the Interstate 94, but by the parkland that is south of 94. Let's continue.
The quarter mile is really important simply because that's where 80% of the people who walk to a station come from. So that's important that we get that part right. And then within an eighth mile, we also have a special zone because that's the area that we'd like to get what we call 18-hour land uses. In other words, eyes on the station. A lot of activity around the station, so it's a little bit more intensity. So as a result of this, we get this sort of fried egg approach. As we get closer to the station, more intensity. as a key component.
This is the hypothetical ideal station. But as we can already determine, that's not going to work in Maplewood, because you heard him say how this 1/8 of a mile is where all the people walk to the station. There's nobody walking from the park south of the freeway that's going to be going to the station. There are going to be few people who are north of the interstate that are going to be walking to this, because you see 3M campus is in the way, and it is a substantial campus, and they are not going to have the public walking through their property to get to the station. So what are we talking about? Let's see what other hokey baloney that they've got.
We want to think about the BRT, the Bus Rapid Transit Guideway, as more than just one mode. And what we're suggesting through this process is to think about incorporating other modes along with that, so that we create what we describe as a multimodal corridor. In other words, bus guideway plus PED and bicycle improvements along that edge. So today, through the 10% design that Lisa identified, there is only a design for the bus rapid.
I want you to visualize this. We're talking about the frontage road that is north of Interstate 94 and 3M. That frontage road currently, well, it's 2 lanes generally. And so if we were to take a look at this multimodal model, we would be saying that we're going to have regular car traffic, we're going to have bike lanes there, and then we're going to have the rapid bus transit guideway, which are lanes that are dedicated for the bus only. So now we're talking about how that frontage road would look. I invite you to go and drive to Interstate 94, get off on Century, and then turn west on the frontage road and drive to McKnight. And I want you to try to visualize what you just saw with the frontage road you're on, and take a look at where the interstate is and where 3M is. The building's right there, you can't miss it. Let's continue with the next clip.
And from that trunk, we'd like to see a big branch, if you will. And so we're calling that branch a primary access route. And so, as I mentioned, we've got an emphasis for this 1/4 mile where 80% of the people walk up to the station. Often we have transit supportive uses that are outside of that 1/4 mile. So it's important for us to provide a strong linkage that ties to those areas as well. So we don't want to forget about those big uses as part of that. Along that, we would then also like to start thinking about opportunities for transit-oriented development. So you see those little pinkish, reddish squares. We want to identify key opportunities.
Okay, you see the blue line. Let's say that that is the frontage road that is running along, north along Interstate 94. To the left of that green line that they show going to a blue circle, well, in Maplewood, that blue circle ends up being, well, either it is, depending upon the scale that you're looking at here, is either more Ramsey County parkland, which is the Battle Creek Park, or single-family residential along Upper Afton Road over there by that Afton Heights Park that Mr. Bradley was talking about at the beginning of the program. So all of this heebie-jeebie talk that he is talking about in theory doesn't work in practice with this station. And of course, none of the city council members in Maplewood are questioning any of this. And you see that bright pink box that they have that is to the right of the blue line. Well, that's approximately where you would find, well, the 3M property. Well, that is the 3M property. There is already commercial there. It's 3M. Mr. Bradley?
Yes, and if we could have that up for one more second. I have another map I want to show you, but notice that there's two major grid lines up there. One happens to be what's actually Century, and the other one happens to be McKnight. The blue line, as you see it, runs next to 94. That's the major definition line that follows the blue line, parallels it. Now, I have the site plan of 3M, and this extends from Century on one end all the way to McKnight on the other end. And if you take a look,
It fills it all in, doesn't it?
it fills it all in. So there is no place for anybody to even reside there. But also, if you take a look at it, where is there any place for anybody to come to ride their bike through 3M to get to this facility? It makes no sense where it is. If you take a look, I put a little hash mark down here.
Let's take a look. Okay.
That little hash mark where my finger is pointing is right where they want to put the station. And notice where it is there. Now, they have an entry ramp that comes right off of there, an exit ramp, if you were able to load back farther back. But the problem is you can't load farther back. And that's our problem with this whole design here. Doesn't make sense. Because what you're looking at is by the time we get that hash mark, you can't get onto the entry ramp.
Right. Now, let's look at our next clip.
Special streets may have this kind of development in special areas along the edges of it. So with that, we want to create loops and connections into the overall neighborhood. So
You saw how he put that one slide up there with all the high-density housing along that route where the rapid bus transit's going to be. Like Mr. Bradley said, where in the world do you think that fits into this map in Maplewood? How preposterous is this presentation? And yet the council sits by and says, how exciting and scary this is. Oh, they're just excited. Well,
Maybe
you know,
they planned that 3M's going to leave. Maybe they know something we don't.
I think that they must be smoking something. That's what I think. Now let's jump ahead to our second to the last clip, because this is a slide that he presented that shows from his perspective how this fits in relation to the 3M site.
and that freeway creates an access barrier. And so ideally, as we showed, it's a 360-degree circle at a station. That freeway makes it only 180 degrees. So what we do have is a half a station, and then on top of that, we've got a station area that is largely built out on the south half. So we've got stable neighborhoods, no big redevelopment sites within that 5-minute walking radius. The other plus here, though, if you can get to it, is Battle Creek Park. It's a regional park, and it not only serves the city of Maplewood, but we know that people along the entire corridor, if they can only get here by transit, they would most likely come and use that facility. Your swim facility, your splash park, all the sorts of things there, and just the recreation opportunities are the kind of things that people look for in terms of livability along a transit corridor. So that's really one of our objectives and our opportunities is how can we get to that regional attraction.
They've put that circle now over the map of what is actually there. So now we're going to talk about the practicality of things. Okay, so we've got this up. Now what I want to show you is you see the little box where they have where the station access will be. Well, okay, let's say that they do put a bridge across the freeway for pedestrians and bikes to access that. But you see where it goes into an established single-family neighborhood, which first of all, there are highway berms along there, so they'll have to bypass all of that. They will also have to bypass all of those houses because you see right across the freeway isn't Battle Creek Park at that juncture. What is across the freeway at that juncture are the single-family homes that are along all of those streets there, and I have door knocked every single one of those homes there at least 3 or 4 times. So I'm very familiar with the neighborhood. And it is actually then to the west of that circle that is Battle Creek Park. And so when you hear him talking about, and these people who ride the Gold Line can then get to your pool and your splash park, he's not talking about Maplewood's pool and Maplewood's splash park. Those are run by Ramsey County. And it's going to be another 5-minute, 10-minute walk through the park in order to get there, because you're still not to Upper Afton Road, because you see on this picture, you do not see Upper Afton Road. That's further south and below the picture that you see. Now, the last thing I want to bring up is that we have the clip that we showed several programs ago of the neighborhood Maplewood is proposing to repurpose from single-family housing to that high-density residential. You know, that pretty picture that we just saw the consultant flash up on the screen minutes ago. Let's pull up this screen from the Maplewood Housing and Redevelopment Commission meeting when they were
On the next
talking
slide,
about
we have
rezoning.
So 2 areas near 3M, and then also the commercial areas to the south of 3M, where we're looking to have this mixed-use neighborhood, or I'm sorry, mixed-use community designation implemented. Gold Line right now is doing stationary planning. So there's, all these areas are having further studies beyond the comprehensive plans. The city is putting lots of resources towards all these areas to make sure that we can do as much work up front.
Keep in mind, they at Maplewood are saying they need to repurpose the single-family neighborhood to high-density unit housing and multi-purpose commercial housing uses. And you can see it's in orange, that big area that's by Conway Avenue. That purple property that we see, that is all the area, generally speaking, of the 3M campus.
Right.
And the rapid bus transit station is going to be down by 94, clearly over a mile from the rapid bus transit station. And yet, are these people going to be able to walk through the 3M campus to get to that station? Maplewood's proposal to rezone and repurpose this single-family neighborhood against their wishes. Keep in mind, 104 people of that neighborhood signed a petition saying that they did not want that change to their neighborhood because it affects their homes that they live in.
Can I have that map put up one more time? Because I noticed something else. I wanted you to think about this. That's 94 and Century. And where I bought my car is at that site that's the south of 94. Mm-hmm. That little circle, the lower circle, that's Merritt Chevrolet. Is Merritt Chevrolet going to go? That's a big tax base for Maplewood. Now, if they're relocating and they're no longer going to be in business, I can understand that maybe it's a planning. But then why hasn't anybody announced that Merritt's leaving? And if it's owned by Merritt Chevrolet, why would they want to go? Is it kind of like with 3M? This is our plan and we're going to condemn it?
Well, and here's a good question for you as well, Mr. Bradley, that you've just brought to my mind. Is that if they're looking for business stakeholders in this whole big plan, did they approach the owner of Merritt Chevrolet to be on that committee as a business stakeholder in this area?
Especially since he has the highest risk of any of us.
That's right. Well, thank you, Mr. Bradley, for going to the workshop and helping us with the news here this week. And viewers, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our program. We'll see you again next week when we return with the Citizens Reporter.